Morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of Hidden Classics. These are just jazz LPs that have great lineups, but are often on the periphery of today's reissue programs and getting the exposure that provides them. These records almost always have incredible membership, but they're on labels that are a little outside of the modern scope on a regular basis. This record happens to be on Regent, which is a subsidiary of the Savoy label. It was a fellow New Jersey label that came into existence in the 40s that Savoy ended up buying, but kind of left to its own individual devices during the 78 RPM era. But as we approached the LP era in the mid to early 50s, they started taking a little bit more control over Regent and issuing kind of some budget releases there, reissuing 10-inch stuff from and 78-inch stuff from the earlier eras. But then about 6,040 or so, about 40 releases in, they start doing some new material. Some of it's stuff that's more on the edges. There's some great hard bop and even some slightly avant-garde, interesting stuff. 57, 58 on Regent. There's some great titles. They're kind of pretty tough to come by. They kind of go under the radar because of the label being kind of unknown. Savoy even rings out more to people than Regent does. But when you look at the back of them, you can see how clearly they're affiliated with Savoy in terms of the layout, the black box printing, that stuff. That's classic Savoy stuff. I first want to show you a really rare Regent that took me a long time to track down. I got it probably last year, maybe a year and a half ago. And it's by one of my favorite singers, the great Johnny Hartman. And it's one of his first sessions. He records it for Regent Savoy, probably 50, 49, 51. I can't remember. It's early. I think it's his first recorded session. And it seems to come from several different sessions. Just You, Just Me. Savoy reissues it later in the 70s on one of their reissue programs, which is how I had it for the longest time. Some of the sessions are more orchestral, but his rich baritone is still a treat. But some of the sessions do have a little bit more of a jazz band behind them. Again, really, really hard to find Regent title. Took me years to track down a copy. 6048. So it's right in that stretch where Regent really starts to do some great stuff. Regent, of course, has that green. I think sometimes they're also kind of a reddish color. Great Hartman title. Not one of his best, but still a great piece. And something I was really desperate to have in my collection at some point. But today we're going to talk about Pepper Adams. Pepper Adams is one of the great baritone sax players of this or any era. Pepper comes from Detroit. He grew up with a lot of the Detroit cats, the Jones brothers. He was part of that whole Detroit scene. Kenny Clark, Flanagan, Paul Chambers, Yusef Lateef. It's a big crew of guys that comes from Detroit Rock City. And Pepper was right from that same neighborhood and played with the Black Cats most of his career, to be honest. Unlike the Jerry Mulligans and the Gil Mellés and Serge Chaloffs, who played mostly in the white scene. Mulligan crosses over some, starting, of course, with Birds of the Cool sessions, which were really a Jerry Mulligan thing. But this is the cool sound of Pepper Adams. She's listening to a seashell. Kind of a gorgeous, if not whimsical, cover. Regent covers are kind of dated, but in a cool way. There's a couple Curtis Fuller records that have interesting covers that don't really relate to the music in any way. But all the same, a cool piece. And on the record, you have Hank Jones, which is worth the price of admission on its own face value. Just one of the great, again, Detroit native. His brother Alvin's on the drums here. of Coltrane Quartet fame. Followed by George Duvivier. If I remember, he might also be Detroit or Philly. I can't remember for sure. Then Bernard McKinney's on the euphonium, which gives it a kind of a rich, sugary tone that complements Pepper Adams' baritone really wonderfully. So all in all, a rare piece with a great band, quite a bit of Detroit City recognized and represented here. Again, tough to find, something you might almost pass over if you saw it in a recent arrival section. But Pepper Adams, if you saw the name, you'd be like, oh, Pep. Pep's a big deal. He's one of the great sidemen, even at Blue Note, that never gets a title as a leader, sadly. But just a cat that was really simpatico and comfortable in a mixed race situation and played with those guys like they were brothers, obviously. And Hank Jones opens this whole thing up. This is the cool. This is the cool. I mean, with Hank, I don't want to have censorship issues here. Pull it down. It's a groove-filled, moist, damp alley of darkness, danger, risk. I mean, there's a real edge to the composition. And I don't remember who composed these pieces. This song's called Blues, Blues, Blues. And of course, it's spelled differently every way. And you can see that. But it's composed by a P. David. But just a fantastic showcase for the rich baritone sound of Pepper Adams and the euphonium of Bernard McKinney. It's a fantastic foray into the blues, slightly R&B tinge, slightly spy noir novel. This side only has 2 songs on it, and they both run a good 7-8 minutes, it looks like. Fantastic groove. I mean, and then euphonium comes in, and Hank Jones does his thing for a while. And if you don't know the delicacy of Hank Jones, the tastefulness, I mean, anybody can throw spice in a frying pan. It's about the measure of spice you play, and it takes a balancing act between minimalism and expression. And to me, the greatest players have that conversational tonality where there's pauses, there's moments of reflection, there's moments for you to sink in what I just played or said to you. And a Monk was great at that. He'd give you something really interesting, and you'd be like, and he would sit out for 4 seconds while you said, that was interesting, cool, what just happened to me? And then he'd come back in. And Hank Jones has a lot of that same restraint, that same, I'm pleased by what I just said. Let me hear that for a second in my head. And then the delicate stroll through the park that his piano. So if you take like Cannonball Adderley and Miles Davis, something else, Autumn Leaves, Hank Jones on that is just magnificent, especially in the outro section where he just tinkles up a fantasy. It's just fantastic, dreamy stuff. But Pepper Adams, like I said, is one of the great baritone players of this era. He always plays with a great deal of blues. The baritone lends itself to a Pink Panther kind of noir sound, in part because of Plaz Johnson, who played, I think it's Plaz Johnson, who played the baritone. He also played tenor and alto and flute and others as well. Very talented guy who played on the West Coast, a lot in that Capitol orchestra scene. I think he played with the the Wrecking Crew at times. So he was a bad boy. Plaz Johnson, Pink Panther theme guy. His records on Capitol, I mean, they're a little light, but that's the nature of the labels he was on and the career path that he chose. He probably could have been a fantastic member of the Blue Note or Riverside Camp had he chosen that direction and had his life open those doors to him. And he certainly has a lot of blues and soul in him, which you can feel. Euphonium, again, it can sound like a trombone, rich and creamy. I think it's actually kind of related to the tuba and the baritone, if I remember. But interesting record. A lot of the great baritone players at this time really are kind of linked into two camps, very kind of racially divided. Pepper Adams, of course, Serge Chaloff out of Boston, who was part of that West Coast cool scene, dies early from heroin, sadly. Jerry Mulligan was one of the great baritone players of all time, and of course one of the leaders of the baritone movement, and one of the great arrangers and composers of this era as well. Gil Melle was a talented writer, composer who works at Blue Note in the early 50s. And he goes to Prestige and makes a couple great records there as well. Then gets into films and soundtracks. But he played the baritone. Billy Rutt, the Detroit guy. These are all the white cats, and they're all great players, man. Lars Gulen, who was a Swede and could really play and has some great records on Hemersey, and I think he's on Storyville, or I have him on a few different labels. Then Jimmy Joffrey, who wasn't an exclusive baritone player by any means, but Joffrey's one of the great composers and arrangers like Mulligan at that time. And then of the brothers, you got Cecil Payne, who's probably the most prolific at that time. He has a few records as a leader on Savoy and a few things at Charlie Parker Records. But and he's on a lot of great sessions as a sideman as well. Leo Parker, who kind of comes from the Bill Jennings school, King, R&B, jump blues. Leo Parker has a couple great records at Blue Note. One was released, I think, and the other one wasn't until much later. But just a great player. If you like guys like King, oh my goodness, King Curtis. I was about to say King Floyd, wrong guy. King Floyd's a great song, has a couple great songs, but King Curtis, if you like that rhythm and blues, that Texas sound, that big tenor, rich tone, you'll enjoy guys like Leo Parker. Sahib Shihab was obviously a Muslim convert and a real kind of urban spiritual player. He's on a lot of interesting records and tends to go towards the more out sounds at times, even though he was kind of on labels and in camps that weren't very out or out. It was just kind of coming into vogue. Plas Johnson, which I mentioned, and Hank Crawford actually plays baritone early in his career. I think it was when he was working with Ray Charles. And then he goes kind of more towards the tenor. And that's the thing with sax players. Most of these guys do switch up and move around. But we're still playing this first blues track. And here's Hank Jones. So again, when you have Hank Jones and Alvin Jones with a great Pepper Adams, it's just one of those records that's off the beaten path. But it's a classic. I enjoy listening to it every time. The Pocket. I mean, Hank's kind of waiting for you to come by him so you can kind of stroll behind you and take in that good scenery. I mean, he's just kind of right behind. I want you just keep walking. You see what I'm saying? I got that one eye squint going. I'm like, okay, yeah. The slyness of Hank Jones. I mean, it's delicate, but it's also filled with innuendo. And in today's politically correct era, and what I find a lot to be phony, because people suddenly can't talk about things that everyone thinks and feels and says, and there's a great dishonesty in that. One of the things we're losing is the joy of innuendo. To me, sex is reflected everywhere in life, in the mechanics and the operations of every simple thing we do. Plugging something into the wall. You know what I mean? It's just a nail into the wood. There's so many examples of that kind of synchronicity. And I think innuendo is a very clever operator. And it's filled with joy and happiness. It's not a negative thing. And the great music of our lifetimes, and even prior to my lifetime, was filled with innuendo. You know, from Blue Suede Shoes all the way back to I Got a Woman. I mean, it's just Ellington was filled with innuendo. I think innuendo is an important thing. And there's a crassness in a lot of today's music that comes with having to up the shock value for every generation. Every decade, you have to have a couple new shock artists that make Madonna seem mild. You know what I mean? That make Ray Charles's corruption of gospel music in the 50s seem meek. But innuendo is a joyous thing. And I wish that we would kind of take some of this witch hunt mentality away from what we're doing and read into people's hearts. I mean, things that aren't spoken in hate, we should be a little bit more lenient with. I mean, people make mistakes, people say dumb things, and a lot of the things that we're being reprimanded for today aren't worth the reprimand or someone's judgment. These people sit around scouring the internet looking for someone to expose. I mean, who made them judge? It's and people become famous for outing a celebrity for something. I think they're shameful people and not worthy of any adulation whatsoever. Tend your own closet, be your own judge, mind your own business. You do the right thing. You know what I mean? Because no one does the right thing all the time. It's impossible. You do the right thing as often as you can. Every day you're given the choice to do right or wrong a dozen times. If you do the right thing 7 out of 10, good job. You know, that's the best most of us can hope for. The notion that there's a race or a color or a nation of people that's good all the time and another that's bad all the time. I mean, we're raised to think that way, but it's ludicrous. Everyone's good and bad. Everyone chooses consistently every day to do the right thing or the wrong thing. And even bad people do good things. And people who are great make mistakes. And I think a person's body of work needs to be reflected upon. You know, if a person's a positive influence on society, some of their mistakes we need to be more dismissive of. But the witch hunt, the Inquisition, pervades and persists at this point. So, again, the joy of jazz music and Hank Jones and his innuendo and his clever little sly remarks. I mean, it's a real fun record from stem to stern, filled with the blues. Nice little up-tempo number here called Like What Is This, which is a McKinney original by the looks of it. And then Skippy, the last number, is a Pepper Adams original. And again, it's you just feel the blues. You feel pocket, space, open terrain. See, no, I can't talk to you if I'm going to talk to you constantly all the time. I gotta blah, 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 blah. It's gotta be blah, blah, blah. So I can say some of this. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. But hear what I'm saying, because I need to break here a little bit so you can comprehend and take in some of what I just swallowed. It's an art form. The conversational nature of good jazz and good playing dictates a natural flow and cadence. And that's sometimes where even bebop and sometimes the avant-garde and sometimes, of course, free jazz loses me, because the conversational element, the space, the ability to sit there and kind of just whisper in my ear, it becomes shouting in my ear. It becomes non-stop drone. Or it becomes 3 instruments talking at the same time, which I can't. My mind doesn't want to have to formulate that, process it. I want to sit back and hear Hank. Okay? You know, I mean, I want to hear Pat when he comes in. And that's why these records are so great from this era. Because the blues was still such an important part of the fabric. And we weren't going to be too willing to just follow any new thing and abandon everything that was established that we knew and the language that we spoke. And again, there's Pepper. And you gotta love the baritone sax. There's a lot of great players. There was something Carney. Harry Carney, who played with Ellington for years. I mean, there's a lot of great baritone players over the years, but I mean, the numbers are infinitesimally small compared to the tenor players and even the alto players. Soprano and baritone, I mean, there's probably more baritone players than there are soprano players. And then the bass sax, which is something you don't see in jazz hardly at all. a guy like Boyd Rayburn dabbled with it, I think it was, on the Savoy label, who had a big band of his own. I think he played the bass sax at times. I've gone through a few of his records trying to find it. I think I found a few honks and blows. The German techno orchestra band that plays techno with live instruments, they have a baritone and a tenor and a bass sax player. Fantastic sounds that they can make as a unit. But yeah, the bass sax is not something you see in jazz much at all. It's a big instrument, first of all, cumbersome, so you couldn't really get on stage and carry it around the country with you very well. I mean, you could do it, but it would take you a bus seat. So that wraps up today's episode on Hidden Classics, Pepper Adams, the cool sound of Pepper Adams. And Bernard McKinney is fantastic. Hank Jones is fantastic. And you also get to hear Alvin Jones. Is a pretty young cat here, probably 58, 59. I think he's 58. And Alvin's like still just a jazz drummer from Detroit. He hasn't really become Alvin Jones' John Quartet yet. And all in all, fantastic piece. One you should be able to find for under $100, and one that hopefully will get reissued someday. But the Regent Savoy label is lacking in terms of the body of its canon being pushed out there for modern consumers. And as we all are discovering more and more all the time, if it ain't being reissued, it doesn't exist to about 70% of the jazz vinyl collectors out there today. They're just buying the reissues, and I think that's a strange approach, because I still always am looking for the old stuff first, and there's still so much old stuff that I'm looking for. So this notion that I'm just going to buy new releases and stuff that comes out of the archives that's unreleased before and not really know the body of the work of any of these artists, I still find that very strange. If you got 3 Bill Evans records and 2 of them came out in the last 5 years, and you don't have much of his Riverside or his Verve content, I mean, it's a bit like having missing episodes of TV shows, but having not watched the TV show. Missing episodes are great, but without the context of the TV show and their career arc and knowing who they were playing with and when and what label they were on, those records have less meaning or value. And it's weird to people who do have the bodies of work of these greats like Bill Evans. A lot of the people I know who collect those guys are less compelled to buy those missing pieces, because we know that kind of like, I mean, if it sat in the vaults for this long, there's a reason. It didn't get put out at the time, there's a reason. Not to say a lot of that stuff's not great. Some of it's fantastic. Some of it's absolutely worthy of being part of the canon. And there's guys that are doing great work right now. Zev Feldman, man, what you do is so impressive. I'm looking forward to those Ahmad Jamal records. I think I'll have to buy those. I'm a big Ahmad Jamal guy. What a true architect of a lot of the sound of the 60s. You know, the spatial openness that even Miles spoke about. He was very influenced by Ahmad Jamal, a great Chicago piano player on the Argo label, who, along with Ramsey Lewis, who just passed, rest in peace, was one of the real staples of the Argo label and the Chicago sound. Although Ramsey tended to be more rhythm and blues and gospel, and Ahmad Jamal was more open and space and mystical. So we'll leave that today. Pepper Adams, great stuff. Johnny Hartman on Regent, great stuff. Regent labels in general, if you find them, they're usually not too expensive, because even record store owners often don't know that it's just a Savoy with a different label. Early Savoy stuff, early Regent stuff, isn't always jazz. Sometimes it's organ, sometimes it's other weird things. But by, like I said, 60-30 or 60-40, it starts becoming a really great string of stuff. So enjoy Regent when you see them. Savoy is a great label. It needs more love shone upon it. Herman Lubinsky was a true pioneer. He was an asshole, but he was still a pioneer. And he discovers and brings a lot of black talent into the New York scene via New Jersey, via Philadelphia and Newark and things along the New Jersey Atlantic coast. All those guys were coming to Newark first. Even Morgan and Bird, Mobley, these guys are recording at Savoy first, and then going to New York and making it at Riverside and Blue Note and Prestige. So great stuff. Pepper Adams, a guy who doesn't have enough records as a leader, but he shows up a lot as a sideman. And Pepper does more stuff as a leader later in his career into the 70s and 80s. A guy who always, if I find a record by him nowadays, I'll buy it, regardless of what label or what time frame it's from, because he just plays the blues, and I can relate to the blues. The blues is a story and a song I can always sing along to and feel. And it comes down to, for me, I can't listen to something that doesn't jive with my philosophy. You know what I mean? I have to be able to feel it. It has to make sense to me. I can't sing along to something that would be counterfeit, or I would feel disingenuous singing along to. And the blues always is something that, even if I don't have the blues that day, I can feel the blues. And I can understand why people in the situation that these artists are in would have them, and why the blues is such an important medication. So y'all be safe. Have a great day. Stay tuned to the channel. I'm glad y'all watched the John Coltrane episode. I figured I'd get 3 times the views on that one, and I did. I got a lot of good views on that one. But we start talking deeper records and deeper artists and hidden classics, and I'm sure I'll get back to my regular 700 views on this one. But I mean, who cares? If I have 700 people who love jazz and deeper stuff, we'll be the community, and that's good by me. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.